Orange flames erupted from the yacht's engine room, painting Harbor Point's quiet bay in hellish light. Jack Hayes gripped his fishing boat's wheel tighter, calculating the odds. 30 seconds, maybe less, before that million-dollar vessel became a floating coffin. Salt spray and acrid smoke burned his throat as he navigated through floating debris, closing the distance to the burning yacht. The sleek vessel's elegant curves twisted by fire, listing dangerously toward the icy main waters. Through the thick smoke, he spotted movement, someone trapped inside. His weathered hands tightened on the wheel, mind racing through what waited at home. Lucy, his 8-year-old daughter, sleeping peacefully in their small harborside house. Her heart condition, a constant shadow over their lives since his wife's death 3 years ago. The risks crystallized in his mind, sharp and unavoidable. If something happened to him, Lucy would have no one. The yacht's port side suddenly erupted in flames. Decision made. Jack cut the engine, dropped anchor with practiced efficiency, and leapt onto his small dinghy. The icy morning air sliced through his canvas jacket as he rowed toward the burning vessel, each stroke measured against the spreading flames. Through the shattered cabin windows, he glimpsed a figure slumped over, unmoving. Jack forced his way through the flooding cabin, smoke burning his lungs. He found her unconscious, a woman in her early 40s, elegant even in distress. Her silk blouse clung to her skin, diamond earrings catching the emergency lights. Everything about her screamed wealth he'd never imagined. Checking for a pulse, Jack found one, weak but steady. He hoisted her over his shoulder, fighting against time and rising water as the yacht groaned around them. Back in his dinghy, Jack laid the woman down, covering her with his spare jacket, before rowing back to his fishing boat with powerful strokes. The distance seemed impossibly long as the yacht's fuel tanks threatened to blow. Once aboard his vessel, Jack radioed the Coast Guard, reporting the burning yacht and requesting immediate medical assistance at Harbor Point dock. The yacht exploded behind them as Jack steered away. The contrast stark, a million-dollar pleasure craft reduced to burning wreckage, while his 30-year-old fishing boat, patched and weathered, carried them safely through the dawn light. At the dock, emergency lights flashed as paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher. Jack handed the woman over, explaining what little he knew. One of the paramedics recognized the unconscious woman, eyes widening. That's Alexandra Morgan, the tech CEO. As reporters and harbor police converged on the scene, cameras flashing and questions flying, Jack Hayes did something that would haunt them both for weeks. He melted back into the morning fog without giving his name, leaving behind only wet footprints in the mystery of a hero who saved a life, then vanished like smoke. Jack's truck rumbled down the coastal road as first light broke over the pines. His clothes still reeked of smoke, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. He'd left before anyone could get his name or take his picture, and with good reason. The Williams family, his in-laws, had been fighting for custody of Lucy since Sarah died, arguing Jack's modest income and demanding work schedule made him an unfit father. A media circus was the last thing he needed. The small blue house came into view, perched on the edge of Harbor Point, with its weathered shingles and narrow porch facing the sea. Jack parked and moved quietly inside, checking the kitchen clock. 5:38 a.m. Still time to shower before Lucy woke for school. Under the hot water, he tried to wash away the morning's events, but his mind kept returning to the woman's face, the weight of her unconscious body, as he'd carried her from certain death. Lucy was awake when he emerged, sitting at their small kitchen table, drawing blonde curls catching the early sunlight. Her small fingers gripped a blue crayon as she sketched what looked like waves. Her face lit up at the sight of him, the smile so much like her mother's that it still caught him off guard 3 years later. Lucy's voice filled the kitchen with questions about his early morning trip, her energy belying the heart condition that kept Jack awake most nights, worrying. He made breakfast as he answered, careful to say nothing about the burning yacht or its occupant. The stack of medical bills on the counter seemed to grow taller every month, a silent reminder of the surgery Lucy would eventually need, a procedure their insurance would only partially cover. At Harbor Point Elementary, Jack watched Lucy join her friends, her backpack nearly as big as she was. From the driver's side mirror, he caught sight of his own reflection, the deep lines around his eyes, the gray creeping into his dark hair at 42. He'd aged a decade in the 3 years since Sarah's cancer took her. The radio crackled to life as Jack started the truck, the local news already reporting the dramatic yacht rescue in Harbor Point Harbor. The reporter's voice filled the cab. The owner of the vessel has been identified as Alexandra Morgan, founder and CEO of Morgan Technologies. Ms. Morgan was rescued by an unidentified local fisherman who left the scene before authorities could take his statement. Ms. Morgan was transported to Portland Memorial Hospital, where she remains in stable condition. The cause of the fire is under investigation. Jack's stomach tightened. Alexandra Morgan, one of the wealthiest women in the country, a tech pioneer whose face regularly graced business magazines, the kind of person whose life generated headlines, the kind of story that brought reporters to small towns looking for human interest angles. Jack turned off the radio, hands clenching the wheel. He needed to stay invisible for Lucy's sake. At Peterson's Marine, Jack clocked in for his shift as a mechanic, nodding to the other workers already elbow-deep in boat engines. The familiar smell of motor oil and fiberglass resin steadied him as he pulled on his coveralls. He'd been fixing boats since high school, first under his father's guidance, then on his own, after the old man's heart gave out. The work paid less than he'd like, but it offered flexible hours that allowed him to be there for Lucy's doctor appointments and school events. By mid-morning, the marina buzzed with talk of the yacht fire theory spreading faster than the flames had. Jack kept his head down, focusing on the outboard motor he was rebuilding. His boss, Pete Peterson, waved a newspaper as he approached Jack's workstation. Pete's weathered face creased with excitement as he described the incident, unaware he was speaking to the rescuer himself. Jack nodded along, offering non-committal responses while tightening a fuel line with more force than necessary. When Pete mentioned the reward being offered for information about the mysterious rescuer, Jack's wrench slipped, scraping his knuckles raw. The blood welled from the cut as Jack processed the information. A reward meant more attention, more people looking. Harbor Point was small, barely 3,000 year-round residents. Secrets didn't last long here, especially when money was involved. During his lunch break, Jack called Lucy's cardiologist in Portland, inquiring again about the timeline for her surgery. The conversation followed its familiar pattern: medical terms. Jack had taught himself to understand cost estimates that made his chest tighten, and the gentle but firm reminder that waiting too long carried its own risks. Dr. Patricia Mills had been treating Lucy since the murmur was first detected, her voice always balancing professional distance with genuine concern. The surgery needed to happen within the year, preferably sooner. The insurance would cover 60%. Jack hung up and stared at the calculator app on his phone, running the numbers again, as if they might somehow change. They didn't. When Jack picked up Lucy from school, her teacher, Ms. Abernathy, pulled him aside with a concerned expression. Lucy had been drawing the same scene repeatedly during art time, a boat on fire in the harbor. Jack's heart sank as Ms. Abernathy showed him the drawings. From their home's vantage point on the harbor, Lucy must have witnessed the early morning rescue, or at least enough of it to capture her imagination. Lucy bounced into this truck, proudly displaying another drawing, unmistakably the burning yacht with two figures on a smaller boat nearby. Jack studied the crayon lines with growing unease. Lucy had drawn the figures with surprising detail, with one unconscious one carrying the other to safety. At home, Jack prepared dinner while Lucy watched the local news from the living room sofa. He froze when he heard Alexandra Morgan's name, quickly moving to change the channel. But Lucy had already connected the dots in that uncanny way children sometimes do. Her innocent question cut through the kitchen. "Daddy, was that lady on TV the angel lady from the burning boat?" Jack measured his response carefully, neither confirming nor denying asking. Instead, what made her think that? Lucy's explanation was simple and devastating in its accuracy. She'd seen everything from her bedroom window when she woke up early, watching her daddy become a hero. Her eyes shone with pride as she described how he disappeared into the smoke and emerged carrying the lady. In Lucy's 80-year-old mind, it was the most exciting thing to happen in Harbor Point since the whale sighting last summer. Jack knelt to her eye-level, hands gentle on her shoulders, as he explained why this needed to remain their secret. He couldn't tell her about the custody battle or his fears of media attention, so he framed it as a lesson about helping others for the right reasons, not for recognition or reward. Lucy nodded solemnly, though Jack wasn't certain she fully understood the stakes. That night, after tucking Lucy in, Jack sat alone on the porch facing the harbor, nursing a beer and watching the lights from the investigation team still working the yacht wreckage. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer, Benjamin Cohen. "Williams filed new motion today. Hearing scheduled next month. Need to talk." The custody battle was heating up again, perfect timing for Jack to appear in the news as the man who abandoned his sleeping child to rescue a stranger. Across the bay in Portland Memorial Hospital, Alexandra Morgan's eyes fluttered open to a world of sterile white and steady electronic beeping. Confusion clouded her vision as ceiling tiles came into focus. Her throat burned from smoke inhalation, the hospital gown rough against her skin. Disoriented, she pressed a hand to her forehead, finding a bandage there. A nurse with kind eyes adjusted her IV drip, explaining how a local fisherman had pulled her from the burning yacht before disappearing without a trace. No name, no contact information, nothing but wet boot prints on the dock that had already dried in the morning sun. Alexandra's mind, sharp even through the fog of pain medication, latched onto this mystery. Who risks their life for a stranger, then walks away without recognition or reward? Her entire professional life had been built on understanding motivations and incentives, on the fundamental belief that everyone wanted something. This fisherman's actions defied her worldview. As her head cleared, Alexandra began piecing together fragmentary memories. Strong arms lifting her calloused hands, checking her pulse, the smell of engine oil mixed with salt water. Her rescuer had been middle-aged with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that had seen hard times. Beyond that, her memory offered nothing but smoke and confusion. Sarah Chen, Alexandra's personal assistant for 7 years, arrived with an overnight bag and Alexandra's laptop. Efficient as always, Sarah had already rescheduled meetings, issued a press statement, and contacted the insurance company about the yacht. What she couldn't provide was information about the mysterious rescuer. Alexandra's fingers tapped impatiently on the hospital bed rail as she issued instructions: hire someone to find this man. Not the police, they moved too slowly and with too much publicity. A private investigator, discreet but thorough. Money was no object. Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet, making arrangements. Alexandra had never left a debt unpaid or a favor unacknowledged in her 20-year rise to the top of the tech industry. She wouldn't start now, especially not with the person who had saved her life. The doctor who examined Alexandra that evening was direct about her condition: smoke inhalation, minor burns, a concussion. She'd been fortunate. Another minute in that cabin and they wouldn't be having this conversation. When asked about discharge, he recommended at least 2 more days of observation, advice Alexandra immediately planned to ignore. Alone in her hospital room that night, Alexandra scrolled through emails on her laptop, trying to distract herself from the questions circling her mind. Morgan Technologies' stock had dipped slightly following news of her accident, but nothing catastrophic. The executive team had things well in hand. Her near-death experience hadn't even registered as a significant market event, a thought both reassuring and vaguely unsettling. At 40 years old, Alexandra had built Morgan Technologies from a startup in her garage to a multinational corporation with 35,000 employees. Her life was measured in quarterly reports, strategic acquisitions, and innovation cycles. Looking around the empty hospital room, she realized something strange: not a single personal visitor. Her emergency contact had been Sarah. No family had rushed to her bedside, no close friends had called, frantic with worry. Alexandra closed her laptop, suddenly restless. The company would survive without her for a few days. Finding the man who'd saved her life became not just an obligation, but an unexpected priority. There was something about his actions, the rescue followed by disappearance, that she couldn't reconcile with her understanding of human nature. It felt like an unsolved equation, an anomaly in her data-driven world. The first private investigator arrived in Harbor Point on Tuesday, asking questions at Murphy's Diner about local fishermen and boat owners. David Reynolds was thorough, methodical, and expensive. Exactly what Alexandra Morgan needed to find the man who'd saved her life. He'd been hired from her hospital bed before she'd even been officially discharged, with clear instructions: find the rescuer, maintain absolute discretion, and report directly to Alexandra. David's investigation started with the obvious places: the 3 main marinas within range of the burning yacht, interviewing dockmasters and boat mechanics who might have noticed someone leaving early that morning. He was looking for a needle in a haystack, but with a methodical approach that had solved more difficult cases. At Captain Pete's marina, David showed his credentials to the owner, describing the type of boat he was looking for. Pete scratched his beard thoughtfully, listing several fishermen who matched the general description. Jack Hayes wasn't among the names mentioned. Pete assumed they were looking for someone with a newer, faster boat that could have reached the burning yacht quickly, not Jack's old fishing vessel that barely managed 8 knots at full throttle. David moved systematically through Harbor Point, speaking with Coast Guard personnel, Harbor Patrol, and early morning dog walkers who might have witnessed something. The pieces came slowly: a middle-aged man, probably local medium build, experienced on the water. But Harbor Point had dozens of men who fit that description. Meanwhile, Jack was careful to maintain his routine, avoiding any behavior that might draw attention. He took Lucy to school each morning, worked his shift at the marina, picked her up in the afternoon, and helped with homework in the evening. Normal life, except for the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach every time he heard a news update about the investigation or saw unfamiliar cars driving slowly through town. Lucy kept her promise about their secret, though Jack noticed her drawings becoming more elaborate. The burning yacht, the rescue, and now a third figure watching from a distance, clearly meant to be Lucy herself witnessing her father's bravery. Jack carefully collected these drawings, storing them in the shed, rather than risking them being seen by a teacher or a classmate's parent. On Thursday morning, Jack received a call from Dr. Mills. Lucy's latest test results showed her condition was progressing faster than expected. The surgery they'd been discussing as a future necessity was becoming an immediate concern. The doctor wanted to schedule a consultation the following week to discuss moving up the timeline. Jack sat in his truck outside the marina for 10 minutes after the call, hands gripping the steering wheel as he processed the information. The surgery would cost nearly $60,000 after insurance. His savings account held less than a quarter of that. The house had no equity to borrow against. His credit cards were nearly maxed out from previous medical bills. Inside the marina office, Jack asked Pete about picking up extra shifts. Pete's expression was sympathetic, but his answer was what Jack expected: business was slow. This season hours were already tight for the regular staff. Jack nodded and headed to his workstation, mind racing through alternative income sources. He could sell the boat, but it was barely worth $5,000 in its current condition, and he needed it for the supplemental income from early morning fishing runs. The custody hearing loomed just a month away. If Richard and Margaret Williams discovered Lucy needed surgery Jack couldn't afford, they would use it as evidence of his inability to provide proper care. The thought of losing Lucy twisted in his chest like a physical pain. That afternoon, Jack was elbow deep in an engine rebuild when David Reynolds walked into Peterson's marina. Jack recognized the methodical way the man scanned the workspace, the careful, casual questions he asked Pete at the front desk. Investigation wasn't just a job for this man. It was a calling evident in every calculated movement. Jack kept his head down, continuing to work on the outboard motor, as David made his way around the shop, asking questions about the morning of the rescue. When David approached his workstation, Jack met his gaze with the neutral expression of someone with nothing to hide and nothing to offer. David's questions were professional and direct. Had Jack heard about the yacht fire? Was he out on the water that morning? Did he know of anyone who might have been in the vicinity? Jack answered honestly without volunteering information. Yes to the first, no to the second and third. Half-truths that felt bitter on his tongue, but necessary for Lucy's sake. David left his card before moving on, asking Jack to call if he remembered anything useful. Jack pocketed it without comment, returning to the engine with focus that wasn't entirely feigned. The investigator's presence meant Alexandra Morgan was serious about finding her rescuer. The net was tightening. At home that evening, Jack researched medical loans and charity programs for children with heart conditions, finding few options that didn't involve media attention or months-long application processes. Lucy needed surgery soon, not after layers of bureaucratic review. Lucy found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork and his ancient calculator. Her small hand covered his larger one, her voice solemn beyond her years. "Is this about my heart, Daddy?" Jack pulled her into his lap, holding her close, telling her not to worry. Some problems weren't meant for 8-year-old shoulders, no matter how perceptive the child. After putting Lucy to bed, Jack called Benjamin Cohen, updating him about the surgery and the investigator. Benjamin's advice was practical but difficult. Avoid the spotlight, focus on securing funds for Lucy's treatment, and prepare for the Williams to use this development in their custody case. Jack hung up and stepped onto the porch, staring at the harbor where the yacht had burned just days earlier. The moonlight caught the waves, turning them silver against the darkness. In the distance, the lights of Portland glowed like a promise just out of reach. Alexandra Morgan checked herself out of Portland Memorial against medical advice on Friday morning, ignoring the doctor's protests with the same determination that had built her company. Her concussion symptoms had subsided enough for her to function, and hospitals had always made her restless. She needed to move to act to solve the puzzle of her mysterious rescuer. Instead of returning to her Boston penthouse or New York office, Alexandra checked into a small bed and breakfast in Camden, 20 minutes from Harbor Point. She told the proprietor, a chatty woman named Beth, that she was a writer researching coastal communities for her next novel. The partial truth seemed better than explaining she was a billionaire tech CEO hunting for the fisherman who'd saved her life. From this base, Alexandra began her own investigation in parallel to David's more official efforts. Where he approached harbor masters in official records, she sought out the human elements of Harbor Point coffee shops, local stores, the community bulletin board at the public library. People who might not talk to an obvious investigator, but would chat with a friendly visitor about local characters and notable events. Alexandra had built her career on understanding people, on seeing patterns and connections others missed. David was thorough, but he was looking for a specific type of hero, probably someone young, ambitious, seeking recognition. Alexandra's fragmented memories suggested someone quite different, older, weathered, with reasons for avoiding attention. At Murphy's Diner, Alexandra ordered coffee and blueberry pancakes, listening more than talking, as the Saturday morning regulars discussed local news, including the yacht fire. Their theories about the mysterious rescuer ranged from plausible to ridiculous, but one comment caught her attention. Old Walt Johnson mentioning that whoever it was must have had a damn good reason for staying quiet, what with that reward money on the table. Alexandra approached Walt after the others left, introducing herself as a writer-hunter interested in the maritime culture of coastal Maine. Walt, a retired fisherman in his 70s with hands gnarled by decades of hard work, was initially suspicious, but warmed to her genuine questions about the unwritten codes of the water. Walt explained the ethic that governed men like him. You help because it's right, not for recognition or reward. Real heroes don't stick around for cameras. They do what needs doing and go home to their families. Alexandra listened, recognizing a value system foreign to her corporate world, but somehow familiar, like a language she'd once known and forgotten. When she casually brought up the yacht rescue, Walt's expression shifted subtly. He didn't know who had done it, he claimed, but he respected their choice to remain anonymous. His next words stayed with Alexandra long after they parted. Some men can't afford to be heroes, ma'am, not with what it might cost them. That afternoon, Alexandra visited the local library, ostensibly researching Harbor Point's history, but actually observing the community. The library occupied an old Victorian house overlooking the harbor, its reading room filled with comfortable chairs and large windows capturing the view. At a small table in the children's section, a blonde girl about 8 years old was drawing intently, surrounded by colored pencils. Alexandra found herself watching the child, struck by her concentration, and the subject of her artwork, boats on water, rendered with surprising skill for her age. Alexandra moved closer, genuinely impressed by the detail in the girl's work. The child looked up, blue eyes curious but not shy. When Alexandra complimented her drawing, the girl, Lucy, according to the name carefully printed in the corner of her paper, beamed with pride and began explaining the different types of boats she'd drawn. Their conversation flowed naturally, Lucy's enthusiasm for art in the sea evident in every word. Alexandra found herself charmed by the child's intelligence and the matter-of-fact way she described her life in Harbor Point. When Lucy mentioned that her father fixed boats at Peterson's Marina, Alexandra felt a prickle of interest but kept her expression neutral. Lucy's next drawing captured Alexandra's full attention. It showed a yacht with orange flames erupting from its windows. Alexandra's pulse quickened as she asked about the picture. Lucy explained that she'd seen a boat fire in the harbor earlier that week, but quickly changed the subject, as if remembering she shouldn't discuss it. The conversation might have ended there if not for Lucy's next innocent question. "Are you the lady who was in the fire?" Alexandra blinked in surprise. Her photo had been in the news, but she looked different now, without makeup and dressed casually for her undercover research. Lucy's expression became worried, afraid she'd said something wrong. Alexandra gently reassured her, neither confirming nor denying, asking instead what made her think that. Lucy's answer was disarmingly simple. "You look like the angel lady in my drawings, but you're not all smoky now." Before Alexandra could respond, a library assistant called Lucy's name, letting her know her father had arrived to pick her up. Alexandra watched through the window as Lucy ran to a weathered pickup truck where a man waited, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples. Even from a distance, something about his posture, the way he knelt to hug his daughter, triggered Alexandra's fragmented memories of the rescue. Alexandra remained in the library until they drove away, her mind racing. The girl's drawings, her careful avoidance of discussing the fire after her initial mention, the timing of her father's arrival to cut short their conversation, it all suggested Lucy Hayes and her father Jack knew more about the rescue than they were telling. A quick internet search on her phone confirmed Jack Hayes was a mechanic at Peterson's Marina, the same marina David had visited in his investigation. The pieces were falling into place, but Alexandra needed to be certain. This wasn't just about paying a debt of gratitude anymore. It was about understanding why a man would risk his life to save a stranger, then walk away from recognition and reward. Alexandra called David, instructing him to discreetly gather information on Jack Hayes, not through direct questioning that might alert him, but through public records and careful observation. David's preliminary report came back within hours. Jack Hayes, 42, widower, raising his daughter Lucy alone since his wife Sarah's death from cancer 3 years ago. Former Navy, now working as a mechanic and part-time fisherman. No criminal record, good standing in the community, but some financial difficulties evident from public records, a mortgage barely kept current, medical liens that suggested ongoing healthcare costs. The final detail in David's report made Alexandra's chest tighten. Jack Hayes was currently involved in a custody dispute with his late wife's parents, Richard and Margaret Williams of Boston. The case was scheduled for hearing the following month. Everything clicked into place. A man fighting to keep custody of his daughter couldn't risk the scrutiny that would come from media attention, especially not if financial instability was being used against him in court. Walking away from the rescue and the reward had been his only option if he wanted to protect his family. Alexandra sat by the window of her room at the bed and breakfast, watching the sunset over the harbor as she considered her next move. She'd found her rescuer, but the discovery had only deepened the mystery. Jack Hayes had saved her without expectation of recognition or reward, an act of pure altruism that challenged everything she thought she knew about human motivation. Her phone buzzed with a series of urgent emails from Morgan Technologies. Robert Barnes, her COO, needed decisions about the quarterly strategy and a potential acquisition. The real world was intruding on her investigation, demanding she return to her role as CEO. Alexandra sent brief responses, buying herself another day or two in Harbor Point before she'd need to return to New York. The following morning, Alexandra drove to Peterson's Marina under the pretense of inquiring about boat rentals. The weathered building smelled of engine oil and salt water, its walls covered with nautical charts and faded photographs of record catches. She spotted Jack immediately working on an outboard motor in the back of the shop, his focus absolute, as his hands moved with practiced precision through the engine components. Alexandra approached, slowly taking in details: the calluses on his hands, the slight stiffness in his left shoulder, suggesting an old injury, the worn wedding band still on his finger 3 years after his wife's death. This was unquestionably the man who had pulled her from the burning yacht, though he looked different in daylight, more guarded, the weight of responsibility evident in the set of his shoulders. Jack looked up as she neared his workstation, his expression shifting from professional inquiry to recognition and then carefully controlled neutrality. He knew exactly who she was, but he wasn't going to admit it unless forced. Alexandra introduced herself simply as Alex, asking about engine repair services for a boat she was considering purchasing. Jack answered her questions with professional courtesy, his tone revealing nothing beyond basic customer service. The conversation remained superficial, a dance around the truth they both knew, but neither acknowledged. As she turned to leave, Alexandra noticed a child's drawing partially visible beneath a repair manual on Jack's workbench, unmistakably Lucy's work showing the burning yacht. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the pretense between them thinned to transparency. Before either could speak, Jack's phone rang. His expression transformed from guardedness to alarm as he answered. Alexandra watched as the color drained from his face, his knuckles whitening around the phone. The one-sided conversation was brief but clearly devastating. When did it start? Is she conscious? Tell her I'm on my way. Right now. Jack hung up already, grabbing his keys and jacket, all pretense forgotten, in the face of whatever emergency had just erupted. His eyes met Alexandra's, raw with fear that needed no explanation. Lucy. Alexandra made a split-second decision, following Jack outside as he rushed to his truck. Let me drive you. You're in no state. For a moment, Jack hesitated, weighing his desperate need for speed against revealing his connection to her. Then he handed over his keys without a word and climbed into the passenger seat of his own truck. As Alexandra drove toward Harbor Point Medical Center, Jack explained in clipped sentences Lucy had collapsed during recess at school. Possible cardiac event. His voice broke on the last words, fear overwhelming his careful composure. Alexandra drove with precise focus, her corporate crisis management skills transferring seamlessly to this personal emergency. She found herself sharing details of her own childhood heart condition, the surgery she'd undergone at Lucy's age, the full recovery she'd made. Whether she was trying to comfort Jack or establish a connection between them, she couldn't entirely say. They reached the medical center in record time, Jack barely waiting for the truck to stop before he was out the door and running inside. Alexandra followed at a respectful distance, understanding this was no longer about their unacknowledged connection, but about a father terrified for his child. In the small emergency department, Lucy lay pale and small on a gurney, connected to monitors tracking her heart's irregular rhythm. The local doctor, clearly concerned but trying to project calm, explained that Lucy needed immediate transfer to Portland Children's Hospital for specialized cardiac care. Her condition had deteriorated faster than expected, and the surgery that had been a future necessity was now an immediate requirement. Jack stood by Lucy's bedside, one hand holding hers, the other pressed against his mouth as he fought for composure. When the doctor stepped away to arrange the ambulance transfer, Jack looked up and found Alexandra standing in the doorway, her presence a reminder of how quickly life could change course. Lucy's eyes fluttered open, focusing first on her father and then with surprise on Alexandra. A small smile crossed her pale face as she whispered something that made Jack turn toward Alexandra with new understanding. In that moment, as monitors beeped and medical staff prepared for transport, the last barriers of pretense fell away. Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "You're the angel lady from the boat fire. Daddy saved you and didn't tell anyone because Grandma and Grandpa might take me away." The simple truth from an 8-year-old's perspective cut through weeks of careful avoidance and investigation. Before Jack could respond, Lucy's heart monitor began beeping rapidly, her small body seizing as medical personnel rushed to stabilize her. Jack was pushed aside, his face a mask of helpless terror as he watched professionals fight to regulate his daughter's heartbeat. Alexandra found herself beside him, her hand finding his arm in a gesture of support that bridged their different worlds. Together they watched as Lucy was stabilized enough for transport, her condition critical, but momentarily controlled. As the emergency team prepared Lucy for the ambulance transfer to Portland, Jack finally turned to Alexandra, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. "Now you know why I walked away that morning. Some things matter more than recognition or reward." Alexandra nodded, understanding completely for the first time. "How can I help?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning, an acknowledgement of debt, a recognition of connection, an offer with no strings attached. Jack hesitated, pride warring with desperate need as he watched the medical team ready his daughter for transport. The cost of the emergency surgery, the custody battle with his in-laws, the impossible choice between working to pay bills and being with Lucy during her recovery, all of it crashed down on him at once, visible in the slump of his shoulders. Before he could answer, the doctor approached with paperwork requiring immediate decisions: insurance authorizations, surgical consents, financial responsibility, forms. Jack stared at the estimated costs with barely concealed despair, his hand unsteady as he signed where indicated. The ambulance team announced they were ready to transport Lucy. Jack would follow in his truck, facing the hour-long drive to Portland with his thoughts and fears as company. As he turned to leave, Alexandra touched his arm again, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll be right behind you. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this." Jack's eyes met hers, recognition finally explicit between them. "You don't have to." "I know," Alexandra interrupted. "That's why I will." As the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing against the gray Maine sky, Jack Hayes and Alexandra Morgan stood in the hospital parking lot, two people from vastly different worlds connected by a burning yacht and a child's failing heart. The rescue that began on the water had somehow evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated, a chance for both of them to save and be saved in ways they'd never imagined. Lucy's ambulance disappeared around the corner, carrying with it the fragile hopes of a father who had already lost too much and the unexpected commitment of a woman who had everything except what mattered most. Whatever came next, the lives that had collided by chance in Harbor Point's quiet harbor were now inextricably linked by something stronger than obligation or gratitude, a human connection as unexpected as it was transformative. Portland Children's Hospital gleamed against the darkening sky, its modern glass facade a stark contrast to the historic buildings surrounding it. The ambulance carrying Lucy had arrived 20 minutes earlier. Jack paced the emergency department waiting area, shoulders rigid with tension as the medical team assessed his daughter's condition. He'd filled out countless forms, provided Lucy's medical history, and now faced the most difficult part: waiting, while strangers determined his daughter's fate. Alexandra entered through the sliding glass doors, having parked Jack's truck in the visitor lot. She moved with purpose, her casual disguise as Alex the writer, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The hospital staff recognized her instantly. Alexandra Morgan's face appeared too frequently in business magazines to go unnoticed. Whispers followed her across the waiting room as she approached Jack. Jack looked up, his expression a complicated mixture of gratitude and wariness. The reality of their situation crashed down on him. A billionaire CEO had driven him to the hospital in his own battered pickup truck. The absurdity might have made him laugh if terror for Lucy hadn't eclipsed everything else. Dr. Patricia Mills emerged from the treatment area, her expression carefully neutral as she approached. Lucy's condition had stabilized temporarily, but the echocardiogram confirmed what they'd feared: her mitral valve was deteriorating rapidly. Surgery needed to happen within 48 hours. Jack's knees nearly buckled at the figure Dr. Mills quoted. The specialized pediatric cardiac procedure would cost well over $100,000. Even with insurance covering 60%, the remaining balance exceeded everything he owned. The timing couldn't be worse. The custody hearing loomed just weeks away, and now he faced a financial impossibility that Richard and Margaret Williams would certainly use against him. Alexandra stood slightly apart, absorbing the medical details with the same focus she applied to corporate acquisitions. When Dr. Mills finished explaining the procedure, Alexandra stepped forward, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to solving problems. "I'd like to speak with the hospital's financial department immediately." Jack's pride rose like a wall between them. "This isn't your responsibility." Alexandra met his gaze directly, the corporate mask slipping to reveal something more human. "You pulled me from burning wreckage without a second thought. At least let me make a phone call." The simplicity of the statement cut through Jack's objections, laying bare the truth neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. In a private consultation room, Alexandra laid out her proposal. She would cover Lucy's medical expenses through an anonymous foundation that supported pediatric cardiac care. No public recognition, no media involvement, no connection to Alexandra Morgan that could be traced or used in the custody case. The arrangement would appear as a standard grant the foundation regularly provided to families facing catastrophic medical costs. Jack's hands clenched and unclenched as he processed her offer. Everything in him resisted accepting help, especially from someone whose world operated on completely different principles than his own. But Lucy's life hung in the balance, and his pride wasn't worth her future. He agreed with one condition: this arrangement stayed between them, with no expectations beyond Lucy's recovery. Outside in the corridor, a commotion interrupted their conversation. Richard and Margaret Williams had arrived, their expensive clothes and commanding presence turning heads in the waiting area. They'd been notified as Lucy's grandparents and secondary emergency contacts. Margaret's voice carried down the hallway demanding information about her granddaughter, while Richard spoke tersely into his phone, likely to their attorney. Jack braced himself for the confrontation, instinctively stepping in front of Alexandra, as if to shield her from this part of his life. Too late, Richard spotted them, his expression hardening as he recognized the woman standing beside Jack. The custody battle had just gained an unexpected complication. Richard's approach was direct, and cold years of boardroom negotiations evident in his stance. "I see you found yourself a powerful new friend, Jack. How convenient." The implication hung in the air between them. Jack was using Lucy's condition to cultivate influential connections. Before Jack could respond, Alexandra stepped forward, extending her hand with the practiced ease of someone who had faced down hostile takeovers and skeptical investors. She introduced herself not as the CEO of Morgan Technologies, but as someone who owed Jack her life. The story emerged in concise, unemotional terms: the yacht, fire, the rescue, Jack's decision to remain anonymous, in their chance reconnection through Lucy. Margaret's expression shifted as she processed this information, reassessing Jack in light of his heroism. Richard remained unmoved, his attorney training focusing on the custody implications rather than the human elements of the story. The uncomfortable standoff ended only when Dr. Mills returned to inform them Lucy was being prepared for transfer to the cardiac unit. Lucy's small form seemed even more fragile against the hospital sheets, her normally vibrant personality subdued by medication and fear. The sight of her grandparents brought a mixture of happiness and confusion. Richard and Margaret's affection for their only grandchild was genuine, whatever their feelings toward Jack. They brought a stuffed otter, Lucy's favorite animal, and spoke to her with gentle reassurance that contrasted sharply with their earlier confrontational stance. When Lucy spotted Alexandra hovering near the doorway, her face lit with recognition. "You found my daddy." The innocent exclamation shifted something in the room's atmosphere, the adults suddenly viewing the situation through an 8-year-old's perspective, a perspective uncomplicated by pride custody battles or social hierarchies. The cardiac surgeon arrived to explain Lucy's procedure, his manner direct but compassionate as he outlined both the necessity and the risks. Jack signed the consent forms with a hand that trembled slightly, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Richard and Margaret watched silently, their earlier hostility temporarily suspended by shared concern for Lucy. Alexandra remained throughout these discussions, absorbing medical terminology with the same quick comprehension she applied to technical specifications and market analyses. Her presence was unobtrusive but steadying, an unexpected anchor for Jack as the medical team prepared Lucy for preoperative procedures. Night fell over Portland, visiting hours ending for everyone except immediate family. Richard and Margaret reluctantly departed for their hotel, extracting promises from Jack to call with any developments. Alexandra prepared to leave as well, but Lucy's small voice stopped her. "Are you coming back tomorrow, before they fix my heart?" The question carried an innocent weight that none of the adults could ignore. Alexandra promised she would return her gaze, meeting Jack's over Lucy's bed, a silent communication that acknowledged the complex territory they were navigating. Whatever barriers existed between their worlds, Lucy had bridged them with the straightforward logic of childhood. In the hushed corridor outside Lucy's room, Alexandra handed Jack a business card with her personal number written on the back. The financial arrangements had been made. Lucy's medical expenses would be covered through the foundation with paperwork that couldn't be traced back to Alexandra personally. She'd also arranged for a hospital suite where Jack could stay during Lucy's recovery, eliminating one small worry from the mountain he carried. Jack stared at the card, the magnitude of her assistance colliding with his fierce independence. "I don't know how to repay this." Alexandra's response came without hesitation. "You already did, 3 weeks ago in Harbor Point Bay." She turned to leave, then paused, adding words that would echo in Jack's mind through the long night ahead. "Some debts can't be measured in dollars, Jack. They're paid in moments that change who we are." After Alexandra left, Jack settled into the recliner beside Lucy's bed for a sleepless night of monitoring beeps and whispered reassurances whenever his daughter stirred. The events of the day played through his mind like a film reel out of sequence. Lucy collapsing at school, the rushed hospital admission, Alexandra Morgan appearing in his life. Again, not as the distant CEO he'd rescued, but as a flesh and blood woman with unexpected depth. Dawn broke over Portland, with thin October light filtering through hospital blinds. Lucy was scheduled for surgery at noon. The preoperative procedures began early, additional tests, medication adjustments, visits from various members of the surgical team. Jack maintained a calm facade for Lucy's benefit, while anxiety churned beneath the surface. Alexandra arrived at 9, having clearly come straight from her hotel without stopping for breakfast. She carried a gift for Lucy, a sketchbook and professional colored pencils, several grades above the school supplies she'd been using. Lucy's delight momentarily eclipsed the hospital setting, her artistic enthusiasm bubbling forth as she explained what she would draw first. The easy interaction between Lucy and Alexandra surprised Jack. His daughter, normally shy with strangers, had formed an immediate connection with the tech executive. Perhaps it was the Angel Lady association in Lucy's mind, or perhaps it was simply Alexandra's manner. She spoke to Lucy directly and seriously, without the condescending tone adults often adopted with children. At 11, the pre-op team arrived to take Lucy to surgery. The moment Jack had been dreading crystallized into sharp focus as he kissed his daughter's forehead, promising to be there when she woke up. Lucy's brave smile contrasted with the fear in her eyes as they wheeled her away, leaving Jack standing in an empty hospital room, clutching the otter plush she'd asked him to keep safe. Alexandra's hand on his arm startled him. He'd almost forgotten her presence in the emotional intensity of the moment. "She's going to be all right. Reynolds is one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country." The confidence in her voice offered a lifeline Jack desperately needed. The surgical waiting area became their shared territory for the next 6 hours. Richard and Margaret arrived shortly after Lucy went into surgery, creating an uneasy quartet. Conversation occurred in sporadic bursts between long silences, surface-level exchanges about Lucy's school performance, her artistic talents, her recovery prospects. During one such lull, Alexandra's phone buzzed with increasing urgency. The calls she'd been deflecting throughout the morning had escalated to emergency status. Excusing herself, she stepped into a private corner of the waiting area to take the call. Her posture transformed instantly from concerned friend to corporate commander, her voice low but carrying undeniable authority. Jack couldn't hear the specifics, but the intensity of Alexandra's responses made the situation clear. A major crisis was unfolding at Morgan Technologies, something requiring the CEO's immediate attention. When she returned to the waiting area, her expression was carefully controlled, but Jack recognized the familiar signs of someone compartmentalizing personal concern to handle professional disaster. Alexandra's dilemma hung in the air between them. Lucy's surgery would continue for hours, but whatever corporate fire had erupted clearly demanded her presence in New York. The conflict in her eyes revealed how unexpectedly invested she'd become in Lucy's outcome. Jack surprised himself by telling her to go. Lucy's going to be in recovery for days. We'll still be here when you've handled whatever that is. The acknowledgement that they would still be there, that this wasn't a temporary intersection of their lives, remained unspoken but understood. Alexandra hesitated, torn between obligations. In her world of shareholder value and quarterly reports, stepping away from a corporate emergency was unthinkable. Yet the thought of leaving before knowing Lucy had safely emerged from surgery felt equally impossible. The internal struggle played across her face, a rare glimpse beneath the composed exterior she presented to the world. Her decision crystallized when Dr. Mills appeared with a mid-surgery update. Lucy was doing well, the procedure proceeding as expected, but they discovered additional damage requiring more extensive repair. The surgery would take at least 3 more hours. Alexandra made arrangements to have her corporate jet standing by at Portland International, ready to fly her to New York as soon as Lucy was in recovery. The waiting resumed with new tension. Jack paced the small area while Richard and Margaret sat rigidly in adjacent chairs, the three of them united only by concern for Lucy. Alexandra worked from her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she managed whatever crisis had erupted, occasionally stepping away for calls that required privacy. During one such absence, Richard broke the strained silence between himself and Jack. "How exactly did you and Alexandra Morgan become acquainted?" The question carried layers of implication and suspicion. Jack provided the unvarnished truth, the yacht fire, the rescue. Alexandra searched for her anonymous rescuer and their reconnection through Lucy. He omitted the financial arrangements regarding Lucy's surgery, knowing Richard would interpret them as leverage in the custody battle. Margaret studied Jack with new consideration. "You saved her life and didn't seek any recognition or reward." The concept seemed foreign to her, as if she were translating from an unfamiliar language. "Why?" Jack's response emerged from a place of bone-deep conviction. "Some things aren't about recognition. They're about who you are when nobody's watching." The simplicity of his answer seemed to unsettle Margaret more than any argument could have. The conversation shifted to Lucy's recovery process, the specialized care she would need, the follow-up appointments, the activity restrictions. Richard and Margaret began outlining how their Boston home could accommodate these requirements, their words carrying the weight of implied superiority over Jack's modest Harbor Point house. Jack listened without interrupting, allowing them to construct their argument before calmly dismantling it. He'd researched everything about Lucy's condition, consulted with her doctors about home care requirements, arranged for a leave of absence from Peterson's Marina, and secured promises from the Harbor Point community to help during Lucy's recovery. His preparation left no openings for Richard and Margaret to exploit. The standoff might have escalated if Dr. Reynolds hadn't appeared in surgical scrubs, his expression revealing nothing as he approached. The surgery had been successful, the damaged valve repaired more extensively than initially planned, but with excellent prognosis for full recovery. Lucy was being transferred to cardiac intensive care, where she would remain for at least 48 hours before moving to a regular room. Relief crashed over Jack in a physical wave, his knees actually buckling as he sank into the nearest chair. Richard and Margaret embraced their usual reserve, cracking under the emotional weight of the moment. Alexandra, returning from a call just in time to hear the news, remained slightly apart, her professional mask firmly in place, though her eyes revealed the depth of her investment in the outcome. Lucy wouldn't be conscious for several hours, and only one person could stay with her in the ICU initially. The decision fell to Jack as her father, creating another potential conflict with Richard and Margaret. To everyone's surprise, Jack suggested they take the first shift while he spoke with Alexandra before her departure for New York. The hospital's small courtyard provided a rare moment of privacy amid the clinical surroundings. October wind whipped between the buildings, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Alexandra had already arranged for her driver to take her to the waiting jet, her executive persona reasserting itself in preparation for the corporate battle ahead. Yet something had shifted between them during the long hours of waiting, a connection forged through shared concern for Lucy that transcended their vastly different backgrounds. Jack found himself telling Alexandra about Sarah's final days, how Lucy had climbed into the hospital bed beside her mother to draw pictures until the very end, how he'd promised Sarah he would give their daughter everything she needed, never imagining how difficult that promise would be to keep. Alexandra listened without interruption, her usual efficiency-driven impatience nowhere in evidence. When Jack finished, she shared her own experience with childhood illness, the loneliness of hospital rooms, the parents who sent gifts and specialists, but rarely managed to visit themselves the way she'd learned early that money could solve problems, but couldn't replace presence. Jack realized with sudden clarity that Alexandra's involvement went beyond repaying a debt. She saw in Lucy a reflection of her own childhood, a chance to ensure another little girl didn't face medical challenges alone. The insight shifted his perception of her actions from charity to something more personal and profound. Alexandra's car arrived, signaling the end of their conversation. Business demands could no longer be deferred. She promised to check in regularly about Lucy's condition and to return when possible, though they both understood the corporate crisis might prevent that for some time. As she prepared to leave, Jack asked the question that had been troubling him since she'd taken those urgent calls. "What's happening with your company? Is it serious?" Alexandra's laugh held no humor. "My COO has apparently been orchestrating a quiet takeover while I've been in Maine. He's convinced the board I've lost focus using my absence as evidence. He's also closed down a manufacturing plant near here, putting 200 people out of work without consulting me." Her expression hardened with determination. "I built Morgan Technologies from nothing. I won't let it become the kind of company that destroys communities for a marginal increase in quarterly profits." Jack watched her go, struck by the parallels in their situations, both fighting to protect what they'd built, both facing opponents who viewed their priorities as weaknesses to exploit. Different worlds, similar battles. Lucy regained consciousness that evening, groggy and confused but stable. The sight of her grandfather holding her hand while her grandmother read softly from a favorite book created a tableau of family continuity that Jack observed from the doorway, his emotions complicated. Richard and Margaret truly loved Lucy. Their desire for custody stemmed from genuine concern rather than spite, which somehow made the situation more difficult rather than less. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of medical updates, shift changes, and careful monitoring. Lucy improved steadily, moving from intensive care to a private room where the restrictions on visitors eased. Jack maintained his vigil, sleeping in short bursts on the room's pull-out couch, while Richard and Margaret rotated shifts and returned to their hotel at night. Alexandra called twice daily for updates, her voice frequently strained by whatever corporate warfare she was engaged in. She spoke briefly with Lucy during these calls, their conversations focusing on art projects and future sailing lessons rather than business or illness. Lucy's face always brightened at these interactions, reinforcing Jack's realization that Alexandra had become more than a grateful survivor or financial benefactor. She'd become part of their story. On the fourth day, as Lucy napped peacefully in her hospital bed, Jack received an unexpected visitor. Benjamin Cohen arrived with a thick folder of legal documents and a concerned expression. Richard and Margaret had filed an emergency motion for temporary custody based on Lucy's medical condition, claiming Jack's financial situation made him unable to provide adequate post-surgical care. The betrayal cut deeper than Jack had anticipated. He'd foolishly believed their shared concern during Lucy's surgery might have softened their position, perhaps even opened the door to compromise. Instead, they'd used the crisis as ammunition, filing papers while maintaining a facade of cooperation at Lucy's bedside. Benjamin outlined their legal options, his assessment frank but not encouraging. The Williams had considerable resources and influential connections in Boston legal circles. Their argument about providing superior post-surgical care carried weight, particularly with Lucy's life potentially at stake. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, fast-tracked, due to the emergency nature of the petition. Jack's gaze drifted to Lucy sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm that had become his most important measurement of success. The thought of being separated from her, of missing her recovery milestones, created a physical ache beneath his ribs. But more devastating was the knowledge that Lucy would be confused and frightened by such a change, her sense of security shattered just when she most needed stability. Benjamin suggested a potential compromise allow Lucy to stay with her grandparents during the initial recovery period, with Jack having substantial visitation rights. This temporary arrangement might satisfy the judge while avoiding a permanent custody decision under emergency circumstances. Jack rejected the suggestion immediately. Lucy needed familiarity and routine during recovery, not a new environment with different rules and expectations regardless of how luxurious the accommodations. He would fight the emergency petition with everything he had, even knowing the odds were stacked against him. That evening, after Richard and Margaret had left for their hotel, Jack placed a call he'd been avoiding. Alexandra answered immediately despite the late hour, the background noise suggesting she was still at her office in New York. He explained the situation without embellishment, the emergency custody petition, the upcoming hearing, the likely outcome given the Williams resources versus his own. Alexandra's response came without hesitation. "I'll be there." 3 simple words that carried weight beyond their syllables. Not an offer to send lawyers or make calls or provide behind-the-scenes assistance, but a personal commitment to be physically present, to stand alongside him in the fight for Lucy. Jack protested weakly, knowing she faced her own critical battle at Morgan Technologies. Alexandra cut through his objections with corporate precision. "Some choices define who we are, Jack. This is one of them." The echo of his own philosophy, who you are when nobody's watching, reflected back at him from an unexpected source. The conversation shifted to practical matters. What evidence the Williams might present, what countermeasures Jack could prepare, what witnesses might strengthen his case. Alexandra's strategic mind approached the custody hearing like a business negotiation, identifying leverage points and potential weaknesses with remarkable clarity. By the time they ended the call, Jack had a more coherent plan for the hearing and a renewed sense of purpose. The odds remained daunting, but he was no longer facing them entirely alone. The realization brought complex emotions, gratitude mixed with discomfort at needing help, relief tangled with pride that still resisted accepting assistance. Lucy's recovery progressed steadily over the following days. Physical therapy began teaching her how to move without straining her healing chest. Child life specialists used art therapy to help her process the surgery experience, resulting in a series of drawings that tracked her journey from fear to cautious optimism. Jack kept Alexandra updated with photos of these drawings, each one capturing Lucy's perspective on her hospitalization in ways medical reports couldn't convey. Richard and Margaret maintained their daily visits, their manner toward Jack alternating between forced cordiality and cool distance. They never mentioned the emergency custody petition, directly creating the surreal situation where they all performed normalcy for Lucy's benefit, while legal documents circulated that could permanently alter their family structure. Major Reynolds conducted Lucy's 1-week post-operative evaluation with encouraging results. The repaired valve was functioning properly, her incision healing well, her vital signs stable. If her progress continued at this rate, she could be discharged within another week, though, with significant activity restrictions and a schedule of follow-up appointments. This positive medical news accelerated the custody battle timeline. If Lucy would soon be released, the court needed to determine where she would go for her recovery period. The emergency hearing was confirmed for Monday morning, giving Jack the weekend to prepare his case with Benjamin. On Saturday afternoon, as Jack helped Lucy with her walking exercises in the hospital corridor, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Alexandra Morgan had returned from New York, the corporate crisis apparently resolved, or at least contained enough to permit her absence. She carried a large portfolio case that Lucy immediately recognized as an artist's supply kit, her excitement accelerating her careful steps. Alexandra knelt to Lucy's level, presenting the gift with genuine pleasure in the child's reaction. The professional-grade colored pencils, watercolors, and sketching materials represented a significant upgrade from Lucy's previous supplies, opening new artistic possibilities that momentarily distracted her from the discomfort of recovery. While Lucy explored her new art supplies, Jack and Alexandra stepped aside for a private conversation. The corporate situation remained precarious. Alexandra had prevented the immediate takeover attempt, but Robert Barnes had succeeded in turning several board members against her, citing her personal distractions and abandonment of responsibilities during the yacht accident recovery. More concerning was what Alexandra had discovered during the power struggle. Robert had been systematically implementing cost-cutting measures that maximized short-term profits while damaging long-term sustainability. The manufacturing plant closure near Harbor Point was just one example of decisions made without considering community impact or ethical implications. Alexandra had temporarily stabilized her position by presenting an alternative corporate vision to the board, one that balanced profit with responsibility. The presentation had bought her time, but the battle was far from over. Her return to Maine represented a calculated risk, one that could either strengthen or undermine her leadership depending on the outcome. The custody hearing loomed like a storm on the horizon, its potential outcomes equally threatening to both Jack and Alexandra for different reasons. If Jack lost, Lucy would be removed from his care precisely when she most needed stability. If Alexandra's involvement became public, it could be framed as evidence of her divided focus strengthening Robert's position with the board. Despite these risks, Alexandra had arrived prepared for battle. The portfolio contained more than art supplies for Lucy. It held financial records, character references, documentation of Jack's careful preparation for Lucy's home care, and a statement from the foundation explaining the medical grant that covered Lucy's expenses. What Alexandra didn't say, but Jack understood implicitly, was that her presence at the hearing would reveal their connection to Richard and Margaret's attorneys, potentially creating complications in her corporate fight. She was risking her company to stand beside him in family court, a choice that defied conventional cost-benefit analysis. Sunday passed in preparation and growing tension. Lucy continued improving physically while remaining unaware of the legal battle surrounding her future. Jack and Alexandra reviewed strategies, with Benjamin anticipating the Williams arguments and preparing counterpoints. Richard and Margaret maintained their visiting schedule, their interaction with Alexandra coolly professional as they assessed this unexpected complication to their plans. Monday morning arrived with autumn rain lashing against the hospital windows. Lucy would remain under nurse supervision while the adults attended the hearing at Cumberland County Family Court. Jack kissed his daughter goodbye, promising to return with good news, the weight of that promise sitting heavily on his shoulders as he changed from casual clothes into the court-appropriate suit Benjamin had insisted upon. The courthouse loomed gray and imposing against the stormy sky, its 19th-century architecture projecting governmental authority. Inside the family court waiting area hummed with subdued conversations and rustling paperwork, the air heavy with the tension of lives being legally reshaped. Richard and Margaret arrived with their attorney Howard Grayson, whose reputation in Boston family law circles inspired immediate concern from Benjamin. Jack's modest legal resources would be seriously outmatched against Grayson's expertise and the Williams' financial advantages. What no one had anticipated was Alexandra Morgan's impact in the courthouse environment. Her entrance caused an immediate ripple of recognition. Not just another witness, but a nationally recognized business figure whose presence transformed the routine custody hearing into something more significant. Court personnel straightened imperceptibly, observers whispered behind hands, even Howard Grayson momentarily lost his practiced composure. As they waited to be called, Jack watched Richard and Margaret conferring urgently with Grayson, clearly reassessing their strategy based on Alexandra's unexpected appearance. The tactical advantage shifted subtly before the hearing even began. The Williams had prepared to portray Jack as financially unstable and unable to provide adequate care, an argument complicated by Alexandra's presence and the implication of her support. When their case was called, the small group moved into the courtroom where Judge Eleanor Harmon presided with the weary efficiency of someone who had witnessed too many families torn apart by legal processes. Her opening remarks established the parameters this emergency hearing would determine Lucy's temporary placement during her cardiac recovery period, with the full custody case to be addressed in a subsequent proceeding. Howard Grayson presented the Williams case first, his argument polished and persuasive. Richard and Margaret could provide superior post-surgical care in their spacious Boston home with a private nurse and proximity to top medical facilities. Jack's financial struggles and work obligations would prevent him from giving Lucy the constant attention her condition required. The logical conclusion, according to Grayson, was temporary placement with the grandparents until Lucy had fully recovered. Benjamin Cohen countered with evidence of Jack's preparations, the approved leave of absence from Peterson's Marina, the home modifications for Lucy's comfort, the network of Harbor Point community members organized to provide support during recovery. He emphasized Lucy's need for familiar surroundings and routine during a stressful period, arguing that separation from her father would cause emotional harm that could impact her physical recovery. Judge Harmon's questions focused on practical matters: insurance coverage, financial stability, proximity to medical resources. Each query revealed the underlying concern: could Jack Hayes provide adequately for a child with serious medical needs, or would Lucy's best interests be served by the Williams' superior resources? The turning point came unexpectedly, not through legal arguments, but through Lucy's own voice. Benjamin presented a series of Lucy's hospital drawings as evidence of her perspective on her care and recovery. The images told a story no medical report or financial statement could convey: Lucy's view of her father as constant protector, her home as a place of healing, her understanding of her own condition through art rather than fear. When Alexandra was called to testify, the courtroom's attention sharpened. Judge Harmon clearly recognized the Morgan Technologies CEO, though her expression revealed nothing beyond professional interest. Alexandra took the oath and settled into the witness chair with the same confident poise she brought to congressional hearings and shareholder meetings. Her testimony began with the yacht fire and rescue, establishing her connection to Jack and Lucy without embellishment or dramatic flourishes. She described Jack's character as demonstrated through his actions, risking his life without expectation of recognition or reward, prioritizing his daughter's well-being above potential financial gain, maintaining his integrity despite significant challenges. The most powerful moment came when Alexandra addressed Lucy's medical expenses, directly explaining the Foundation's grant program and the comprehensive coverage it provided for Lucy's treatment and follow-up care. This revelation effectively neutralized the Williams' strongest argument about financial capability, shifting the focus from economic resources to emotional stability and family continuity. Grayson attempted to undermine Alexandra's testimony on cross-examination, suggesting her involvement stemmed from guilt or obligation rather than genuine assessment of Jack's parental capabilities. His questions implied a transactional relationship: Jack had saved her life, and now she was repaying the debt by financing Lucy's medical care and supporting his custody claim. Alexandra's response cut through the legal maneuvering with unexpected directness. Mr. Hayes had every opportunity to capitalize on rescuing me. Instead, he walked away and went home to his daughter. In my world, that kind of integrity isn't a liability. It's exactly what I'd want in someone raising a child. As the hearing concluded, Judge Harmon announced she would review the evidence and deliver her decision the following morning. The temporary reprieve felt more ominous than relieving, extending the uncertainty for another day, while Lucy continued recovering, unaware that her future hung in judicial balance. Outside the courthouse, rain continued falling, matching the somber mood as the group dispersed. Richard and Margaret departed first, their expressions tense as they consulted with Grayson. Benjamin offered cautiously optimistic assessments of their position before leaving to prepare additional documentation requested by the judge. Jack and Alexandra remained on the courthouse steps, momentarily united by the strange battlefield of family court. The corporate CEO and the boat mechanic standing side by side against the rain, connected by circumstances neither could have imagined weeks earlier, when a yacht caught fire in Harbor Point Harbor. Alexandra's phone buzzed with urgent messages, the Morgan Technologies situation demanding her attention, even while Lucy's custody remained unresolved. Jack noticed her expression changing as she read the screen, corporate concerns reasserting their priority in her divided attention. Before she could speak, Jack said the words that acknowledged their impossible situation. "You need to go back to New York." Not a question, but a recognition of the reality they both faced. Whatever connection had formed between them, whatever debt existed, the worlds they inhabited still operated on fundamentally different principles. Alexandra didn't deny it, her gaze shifting between her phone and Jack with rare uncertainty. The corporate crisis had escalated, requiring immediate intervention if she hoped to maintain control of her company. Yet walking away now before knowing Lucy's fate seemed impossible after everything they'd shared. Jack made the decision easier. "Lucy and I will be fine whatever happens tomorrow. You've done more than enough." The words cost him something to say, pride mingling with genuine concern for the battle Alexandra faced in New York. Some fights you have to finish alone. The rain intensified around them, punctuating the moment of decision. Alexandra's response came with the same directness that characterized her testimony. "I'll be on the first flight tomorrow morning. Judge Harmon delivers decisions at 9. I'll be in that courtroom." Not a promise easily made or kept given the corporate fires consuming her attention, but a commitment nonetheless. As they parted, Jack to return to Lucy's hospital bedside and Alexandra to deal with the Morgan Technologies crisis remotely. The strange intersection of their lives seemed simultaneously fragile and unbreakable, a connection forged through crisis, tested by circumstance, and now facing its most significant challenge yet. Cumberland County Courthouse stood sentinel in the gray morning light as Judge Harmon reviewed her notes one final time. The courtroom had filled early Harbor Point residents occupying several benches in support of Jack, while reporters scribbled notes in anticipation of the ruling. Jack sat beside Benjamin Cohen, his shoulders tense beneath the borrowed suit jacket that felt like costume rather than clothing. Richard and Margaret Williams waited across the aisle with Howard Grayson, their confidence noticeably dimmed since yesterday's proceedings. The courtroom doors opened silently. Alexandra Morgan slipped inside, still wearing yesterday's clothes, exhaustion battling determination on her face. She'd clearly come directly from the airport, likely without sleeping. Her presence shifted the atmosphere, creating a subtle realignment of energies that even Judge Harmon seemed to notice as she entered the courtroom moments later. Alexandra took a seat directly behind Jack, her hand briefly touching his shoulder in silent support. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by Richard and Margaret, whose expressions tightened with renewed concern. Judge Harmon began methodically establishing the legal framework for her decision, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had witnessed countless family battles. When she finally reached her ruling, the pronouncement came with judicial clarity. Temporary custody would remain with Jack Hayes during Lucy's recovery period, with structured visitation rights for Richard and Margaret Williams. The judge's explanation emphasized stability and emotional continuity during Lucy's healing process. The financial concerns had been adequately addressed through the Medical Foundation's support. Harbor Point offered sufficient resources for recovery, and most significantly, Lucy's own artistic expressions had clearly indicated her desire to return home with her father. Relief crashed through Jack in waves, momentarily weakening his knees. Benjamin squeezed his arm in congratulation, while across the aisle, Richard and Margaret conferred urgently with Grayson. The attorney appeared to be advising against immediate appeal, suggesting strategic retreat rather than continued battle. Outside the courtroom, Harbor Point supporters surrounded Jack with congratulations, while Alexandra hung back, allowing him this moment with his community. When the crowd thinned, she approached with genuine happiness, reflecting in her tired eyes. Jack's gratitude emerged raw and unfiltered. "You made it. After everything happening with your company, you still came." Alexandra's response carried unexpected vulnerability beneath her usual confidence. "Some choices define us more than others. I've made plenty of billion-dollar decisions, but few I'll remember as clearly as being in that courtroom today." Their moment of connection broke when Richard and Margaret approached their expressions, complicated mixtures of disappointment and reluctant acceptance. The custody battle had changed something fundamental between them and Jack, no longer adversaries perhaps, but not yet allies in Lucy's care. Margaret spoke first, her voice carefully controlled. "We'd like to see Lucy before we return to Boston, to explain that we'll be visiting regularly during her recovery." The request came without legal threats or conditions, a small but significant shift from their previous position. Richard added something unexpected. "We've been thinking about finding a summer home in Harbor Point, to be closer to Lucy throughout the year, not just during health crises." The olive branch came awkwardly extended, but genuine nonetheless. The four adults reached an uneasy truce in the courthouse hallway. Not friendship or full reconciliation, but shared acknowledgement that Lucy's well-being required cooperation rather than conflict. They would tell her together about the judge's decision, presenting a united front that prioritized her recovery. At Portland Children's Hospital, Lucy sat up in bed, coloring in the sketchbook Alexandra had given her. Her face brightened at the sight of all four adults entering together, though confusion quickly followed. Children develop finely tuned radar for detecting tension between grown-ups, and Lucy's was especially acute. Jack explained the judge's decision in simple terms. She would go home to Harbor Point when the doctors said she was ready, and Grandma and Grandpa would visit often during her recovery. The wording acknowledged the Williams' place in Lucy's life while reaffirming her primary home with Jack. Lucy's reaction reflected both relief and lingering anxiety. "But what about when I get all better? Will there be more court?" Richard answered before Jack could, kneeling beside Lucy's bed with unexpected gentleness. "No more court, sweetheart. We've all decided that what matters most is that you get well and are happy." The commitment represented significant concession from the previously litigious Williams. Dr. Reynolds arrived with good news. Lucy could be discharged in 3 days if her progress continued. Recovery at home would require careful monitoring and limited physical activity, but all signs indicated successful repair of her heart valve. While Lucy chatted with her grandparents about their planned visits, Jack drew Alexandra aside. The shadows beneath her eyes had deepened, her phone buzzing continuously with messages she struggled to ignore. Whatever corporate fire she temporarily escaped still burned fiercely in New York. Jack faced the inevitable. You need to go back and deal with your company. Alexandra didn't deny it, though her expression revealed the conflict she felt. The situation at Morgan Technologies had deteriorated overnight. Robert Barnes had accelerated his takeover attempt, convinced the board to call an emergency meeting, and begun courting key shareholders with promises of increased dividends at the expense of Alexandra's long-term vision. Before leaving, Alexandra spent a few minutes with Lucy admiring her latest drawings and promising to return when possible. The connection between them had strengthened during Lucy's hospitalization, establishing its own unique character beyond obligation or gratitude. As Alexandra prepared to depart, Jack walked her to the elevator away from Lucy's room and prying eyes. The moment demanded acknowledgement of what had developed between them, something neither fully understood yet. Jack broke the silence. When this is all settled, Lucy's recovery, your company's situation, I'd like to show you Harbor Point properly. Not as a billionaire searching for a mysterious rescuer or a CEO handling a crisis, but just as yourself. Alexandra's smile reached her eyes despite her exhaustion. I'd like that. More than makes sense, actually. The admission carried vulnerability unusual for someone who navigated corporate warfare with calculated precision. 3 days later, Lucy was officially discharged from Portland Children's Hospital. Harbor Point welcomed her home with the warmth only small communities can generate. Handmade signs decorated the route from the highway to the Hayes home. Casserole dishes and care packages lined the porch. Pete from the marina had organized a rotation of neighbors to help with everything from grocery shopping to transportation for follow-up appointments. Lucy's face brightened at the sight of their small, blue house perched above the harbor. Whatever medical challenges lay ahead, she was returning to familiar territory with her father, her art supplies, and her view of the water. Inside, Jack discovered unexpected changes. The Harbor Point community had transformed the house during his absence, cleaning, organizing, and making thoughtful modifications for Lucy's recovery. The living room contained a comfortable daybed positioned to capture the harbor view, allowing Lucy to rest while still participating in daily life. The kitchen had been stocked with meals, the bathroom equipped with safety features, Lucy's bedroom rearranged for easier navigation. Richard and Margaret's reaction to the modest home revealed their shifting perspective. Instead of focusing on what the house lacked compared to their Boston residence, they noticed the care evident in every corner. Photographs of Lucy and Sarah artwork displayed prominently, books and games selected for a curious 8-year-old mind. That evening, after Lucy had fallen asleep in her own bed for the first time in weeks, Jack sat on the porch with Richard and Margaret. The conversation unfolded with the weight of years of misunderstanding and mutual suspicion, slowly giving way to cautious recognition of shared love for Lucy. Richard revealed something Jack had never known. Sarah had struggled with her parents' expectations, their high-pressure approach, creating distance she had never managed to bridge before her death. The regret in Richard's voice opened a new dimension in Jack's understanding of the Williams' desperate grip on Lucy, their final connection to a daughter they had loved imperfectly but completely. Margaret spoke of their fear that Lucy would disappear from their lives, as Sarah had chosen to do for several years before meeting Jack. Their aggressive pursuit of custody stemmed not from belief that Jack was unfit, but from terror of losing their only grandchild, as they had lost their only daughter, to choices they hadn't understood and distances they hadn't known how to cross. Jack shared his own perspective, the financial struggles that began with Sarah's cancer treatments, the fear that economic limitations would be interpreted as parental inadequacy, the determination to honor Sarah's wish that Lucy grow up with the freedom to choose her own path rather than following predetermined expectations. The conversation didn't resolve every tension, but it established common ground that had seemed impossible during courthouse confrontations. Lucy needed all of them: her father's steadfast presence, her grandparents' love and resources, the Harbor Point community's support, and perhaps Alexandra's unexpected influence. Over the following weeks, Alexandra called daily despite her corporate battles. Her updates about Morgan Technologies grew increasingly concerning. Robert Barnes had consolidated support among key board members, positioning himself as responsible steward while portraying Alexandra as distracted by personal matters. The emergency board meeting would determine control of the company she had built from nothing. Jack found himself checking business news sites regularly, his concern for Alexandra growing as headlines reported leadership uncertainty in executive committee emergency sessions. Lucy noticed his distraction, her perceptiveness, catching frequent phone checks and worried glances. A month after Lucy's return home, Richard and Margaret announced they had purchased, not rented, the Harbor Point cottage. The decision represented permanent commitment to regular presence in Lucy's life while respecting Jack's primary custody. Their explanation, wanting to be involved grandparents without being intrusive, demonstrated how far they had come from their adversarial position. On a crisp November morning, Pete Peterson brought unsettling news to Jack at the marina. The Harbor Point dock and fishing facilities, the economic heart of the community, were being targeted for acquisition by Coastal Development Partners, a luxury resort company. The initial offers had been politely declined by the town council, but rumors circulated that CDP was preparing to increase pressure through political channels and financial incentives to individual property owners. Jack immediately recognized the pattern from stories Alexandra had shared about corporate takeovers: divide community interests, create competition between neighbors, establish beachheads through key property purchases. Once the process gained momentum, small communities rarely managed to resist the transformation of working waterfronts into tourist destinations. That evening, Jack received an unexpected call from Alexandra. Her voice sounded different, quiet, but with an undercurrent of liberation rather than defeat. The board meeting had concluded with a compromise neither she nor Robert had fully anticipated. Alexandra would remain CEO, but step back from day-to-day operations, focusing on strategic vision and innovation, her original passions, while a restructured executive team handled operational decisions. Robert Barnes would become COO with expanded authority, but remain accountable to Alexandra and the board. The arrangement represented both loss and opportunity. Alexandra would retain control of the company's long-term direction, while relinquishing daily management that had increasingly consumed her life. The enforced distance from operational details created space for perspective she had gradually lost during Morgan Technology's explosive growth. Most significantly, the new structure would allow Alexandra to work remotely part-time, making extended stays in Maine possible without abandoning corporate responsibilities. The possibility hung unspoken between them, a future where Harbor Point might become more than a temporary crisis location. Jack shared the news about Coastal Development Partners, explaining the threat to Harbor Point's traditional character and livelihood. Alexandra's response carried immediate concern, followed by a telling silence when Jack mentioned the parent company Meridian Group, a conglomerate with significant business connections to Morgan Technologies. 2 days later, Jack received a package containing extensive research on CDP's development patterns in other coastal communities, legal resources for resisting corporate acquisition of public access waterfronts, and case studies of communities that had successfully preserved working harbors through creative zoning and economic structures. Alexandra had clearly spent hours compiling information that might help Harbor Point protect itself without mentioning the Meridian connection. Jack presented the information at an emergency town meeting held at Murphy's Diner. The community's reaction mixed determination with resignation. Harbor Point residents valued their way of life, but recognized the financial realities facing small fishing communities in the modern economy. Several property owners admitted they had already received purchase offers significantly above market value, creating difficult decisions for families with limited retirement savings. Jack found himself unexpectedly at the center of community organizing efforts, his quiet competence and reputation for integrity making him a natural leader, despite his usual preference for keeping to himself. Lucy contributed by creating posters and artwork for the Save Our Harbor campaign, her artistic talents serving community purpose beyond personal expression. Richard and Margaret surprised everyone by throwing their influence and connections behind the preservation effort. Richard's legal background proved invaluable in navigating regulatory frameworks, while Margaret's experience with Boston philanthropic circles opened doors to conservation organizations interested in protecting working waterfronts. As Thanksgiving approached, Alexandra called with news that she would arrive the day before and stay through the weekend, her first extended visit since Lucy's surgery. The timing coincided with another CDP presentation to the town council, creating both personal anticipation and community tension. Harbor Point received its first significant snowfall the day before Thanksgiving, transforming the coastal landscape into a postcard scene. Lucy spent the morning at the window with her sketchbook, capturing the changed environment with growing artistic skill. Richard and Margaret arrived bearing additional groceries for the holiday meal, their initial discomfort in Jack's modest kitchen having evolved into good-natured cooperation. The relationship remained imperfect, but had found equilibrium that prioritized Lucy's happiness. The unexpected sound of tires on the snowy driveway drew everyone's attention. Lucy reached the window first, her exclamation confirming what her drawing had somehow anticipated. "It's Alex. I told you she'd come." Alexandra Morgan stood beside a rental car, snow-dusting her dark hair and city coat, looking simultaneously out of place and perfectly right in the Harbor Point setting. The corporate armor had been partially shed designer suit replaced by casual clothes phone, conspicuously absent from her hand. Lucy rushed to the door despite recovery restrictions, her enthusiasm overwhelming caution. Jack followed more slowly, awareness of Richard and Margaret's watchful presence tempering his reaction to Alexandra's arrival. The dynamics shifted with Alexandra's entrance not uncomfortably, but with recognition that relationships had evolved during separation. Lucy's immediate attachment manifested in eager updates about recovery progress and art projects. Richard and Margaret displayed cautious cordiality, their suspicion of Alexandra's motives softened by her consistent support during the custody resolution. That evening, after Lucy had gone to bed and Richard and Margaret had returned to their cottage, Jack and Alexandra finally had the conversation they'd been postponing. Seated on the porch despite November cold, wrapped in blankets against the chill, they addressed the connection that had formed between them. Alexandra spoke first, her directness cutting through potential awkwardness. "I've restructured my entire company to make room for whatever this is between us. That's either the most irrational decision of my career or the first completely rational choice I've made in years." Jack recognized the vulnerability beneath her matter-of-fact delivery, a woman accustomed to calculating risk facing something that defied traditional metrics. His response acknowledged both her courage and his own uncertainty. "Most people spend their lives in one world. You and I crashed into each other's at exactly the right moment, and now neither fits quite the same way it did before." The conversation shifted to practical matters. Alexandra had established a working arrangement allowing her to spend up to 2 weeks monthly away from New York, with technology enabling remote management during absences. The Harbor Point cottage she planned to purchase just down the shore from Jack's house would serve as both vacation property and secondary workspace. Before they could discuss personal implications further, Alexandra addressed the coastal development situation. "I discovered something troubling yesterday. Meridian Group's acquisition of CDP was orchestrated by Robert Barnes without my knowledge. He structured it through subsidiaries specifically to keep it off my radar, knowing my growing connection to Harbor Point." Jack's expression tightened as he processed this betrayal. "So your own company is behind the development threatening to destroy this community?" Alexandra's response came with regret, but determination. "Technically, yes. But I've spent the past week untangling the corporate structure, and I believe I've found leverage points. Meridian needs Morgan Technologies' intellectual property licenses more than they need Harbor Point real estate." Her eyes held steady resolve. "I didn't build a company just to watch it destroy communities I care about." The following morning brought the Thanksgiving holiday and the scheduled CDP presentation to the town council. The council had agreed to the holiday meeting to accommodate executives traveling from Boston, unaware of the strategy behind the timing. Communities focused on family gatherings typically mounted minimal resistance to corporate presentations. Alexander's attendance at the meeting created immediate disruption to CDP's carefully orchestrated pitch. The executives recognized the Morgan Technologies CEO instantly, their rehearsed talking points faltering as they realized their corporate structure wasn't as anonymous as planned. When the CDP spokesman began outlining the inevitable economic transition away from commercial fishing, Alexander asked a single-pointed question about the Coastal Heritage Preservation Act legislation she had quietly helped draft through industry associations the previous week. The question revealed preparation and knowledge the development team hadn't anticipated from a small Maine community. The meeting transformed from standard corporate presentation to genuine negotiation when Alexandra presented an alternative development model she'd developed during sleepless nights between board meetings. The Harbor Point Maritime Center would combine traditional working waterfront with educational facilities, technology incubator space, and limited tourist accommodations designed to complement rather than replace the fishing industry. The proposal represented something genuinely innovative, neither pure preservation nor standard development, but thoughtful evolution that respected Harbor Point's character while creating economic sustainability. Funding would come through a partnership between Morgan Technologies Foundation conservation organizations Richard had contacted and community ownership shares that protected local interests. As the meeting concluded, Harbor Point residents approached Alexandra with mixed reactions. Gratitude for her intervention, but wariness about her motivations in the sudden appearance of corporate solutions to their community problems. Jack recognized the complexity of her position, neither fully insider nor outsider, bringing resources that could save the community while raising questions about influence and control. That afternoon, Thanksgiving dinner at the Hayes home became both celebration and strategy session. Lucy presided with 8-year-old dignity, delighted by the fulfillment of her drawing's prediction. Alexandra at their table, Richard and Margaret participating as family rather than adversaries. The entire group focused on preserving Harbor Point's future. After dinner, while Lucy showed her grandparents her latest art project, Jack and Alexandra stepped outside to watch the sunset over the harbor. The winter light transformed the familiar landscape harsh summer glare, replaced by softer golden illumination that revealed different beauty in the coastal setting. Alexandra's observation carried unexpected depth. I've owned vacation properties all over the world, places people save lifetimes to visit once, but this is the first spot that feels like it might become home someday. Jack studied her profile, noting how Maine's cold had brought color to her cheeks in ways New York boardrooms never did. So what happens next with your company, with Harbor Point, with... He hesitated, the unspoken question hanging between them. Alexandra turned to face him, fully corporate calculation replaced by personal certainty. I'm restructuring my work schedule to spend 2 weeks every month here. I've already purchased the Thompson cottage down the shore. The Harbor Point Maritime Center will take about 18 months to launch, which gives us time to build community support and design appropriate governance. Her voice softened. As for us, I think we've both had enough dramatic changes for 1 year. But I'd like to see where this goes, whatever this is. The winter months brought steady progress on multiple fronts. Alexandra established her presence in Harbor Point through regular 2-week stays, her cottage gradually acquiring personal touches that transformed it from investment property to genuine second home. Her corporate obligations required returns to New York, but technology enabled continuous connection during absences. The Harbor Point Maritime Center moved from concept to concrete planning. Architectural designs incorporated existing structures while adding facilities that serve both traditional fishermen and new technology ventures focusing on sustainable marine industries. The funding structure ensured community control while leveraging outside investment. Lucy's recovery progressed steadily, each follow-up appointment confirming the surgery's success. Her energy returned incrementally, allowing longer periods of activity between necessary rest. Her artistic talents continued developing, now supplemented by professional instruction arranged through Alexandra's connections. Richard and Margaret's relationship with Jack evolved toward genuine respect. Their initial judgment of his modest circumstances replaced by recognition of his unwavering commitment to Lucy's well-being. They spent Christmas in Harbor Point, rather than insisting Lucy travel to Boston, another indication of their adjusted priorities. February marked 1 year since Lucy's diagnosis and 6 months since her successful surgery. The follow-up appointment with Dr. Reynolds brought the best possible news. Lucy's heart function had normalized completely, with no indications of future complications. The medical journey that had dominated their lives for a year could finally be concluded. The celebration dinner included Richard, Margaret, Alexandra, and key Harbor Point community members who had supported them throughout Lucy's treatment. The gathering represented a milestone not just in Lucy's recovery, but in relationships formed or transformed during the crisis. After everyone departed and Lucy went to bed, Jack and Alexandra walked along the snowy harbor path, winter moonlight illuminating their way. The conversation acknowledged what had been developing between them, a connection that had begun with rescue and obligation, but evolved into something neither had anticipated. Jack's perspective had shifted since their first genuine conversation. A year ago, I would have said our worlds were too different to find common ground. Now, I'm not sure there's such a thing as separate worlds, just people who haven't discovered what matters most to them yet. Alexandra's response reflected similar evolution. I built a company around the idea that technology connects people across distances. It took nearly drowning and meeting you and Lucy to understand that connection means something entirely different than I thought. Their relationship progressed deliberately through winter into spring, both aware that Lucy's well-being remained the priority around which other considerations revolved. Jack maintained appropriate boundaries, ensuring Lucy understood Alexandra's growing role in their lives, without creating unrealistic expectations or complications. March brought finalization of Morgan Technology's restructuring, with Alexandra's new role established and the executive team reorganized to support remote leadership. The arrangement represented corporate innovation rather than compromise, distributed management, enabling better work-life balance throughout the organization. April saw the anniversary of the yacht fire and rescue, a date that passed without public commemoration, but with private acknowledgement between Jack and Alexandra. The incident that had connected their lives remained significant without defining their relationship, the initial debt of rescued and rescuer having evolved into mutual respect and deepening affection. By early summer, the Harbor Point Maritime Center broke ground with a community ceremony that symbolized both preservation and evolution. The project had gained momentum, with several technology companies specializing in sustainable fishing practices already committed to the incubator space. Lucy participated in the groundbreaking. Her artwork featured prominently in the ceremony and incorporated into the building design. At 9 years old, she had transformed from passive patient to active community contributor, her talent serving both personal expression and public purpose. That evening, as they watched sunset from their favorite harbor bench, Alexandra shared news she had been carefully considering for weeks. Morgan Technologies has been approached about acquisition by Techron Industries. The offer is substantial, life-changing money even by my standards. She paused, studying the harbor lights. 5 years ago, I would have evaluated it solely on financial terms. Now I'm weighing how it affects Harbor Point, the Maritime Center, Lucy's future art programs, the employees who've trusted me. Her voice softened. And us. Jack considered her words, understanding the significance of including their relationship in her decision framework. What are you thinking? Alexandra's response reflected how thoroughly her priorities had shifted. I'm thinking I could sell my controlling interest, but maintain leadership of the foundation and the research division. It would mean significant changes to my role in New York, more freedom to be here, and she hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic uncertainty, perhaps the chance to consider a more permanent arrangement between us. The conversation opened possibilities neither had explicitly voiced before: a shared future beyond coordinated schedules and separate residences. They agreed to consider options thoughtfully rather than rushing decisions, recognizing that permanent commitments would affect not just themselves, but Lucy, Richard, and Margaret, and the Harbor Point community that had become increasingly important to them both. The summer solstice brought Harbor Point's annual boat parade, a community celebration coinciding with tourist season. Lucy participated for the first time, her artwork decorating Jack's fishing boat as it joined the harbor procession. Alexandra watched from shore, her expression reflecting how thoroughly her priorities had shifted since their first encounter. That evening, as they celebrated with community members at Murphy's Diner, Alexandra received the call confirming Techron Industries' final offer terms, even more favorable than anticipated, with guarantees protecting the Harbor Point Maritime Center, employee positions, and Alexandra's leadership of the foundation. Jack raised a toast when she shared the news, recognizing the significance of the decision she would make. The moment carried weight beyond business considerations, representing potential transformation in their personal lives as well. As summer progressed, Alexandra's presence in Harbor Point extended beyond her scheduled 2-week periods, her New York apartment increasingly unused as she managed remaining corporate responsibilities remotely. Lucy thrived with this arrangement, developing a relationship with Alexandra that complemented rather than competed with her bond with Jack. In August, Alexandra accepted a modified version of Techron's offer, maintaining leadership of the foundation and research division while transferring operational control of Morgan Technologies. The transaction represented not just business evolution, but personal transformation, deliberate choice to prioritize relationship and community over corporate identity. Alexandra and Jack celebrated with a small dinner at her cottage, joined by Lucy, Richard, and Margaret. The conversation turned to future plans, including Lucy's upcoming school year, the Maritime Center's development, and most significantly, Alexandra's permanent relocation to Harbor Point. As Lucy described her latest art project to her grandparents, Jack and Alexandra stepped outside to watch harbor lights reflecting on calm water. The parallel to their first meeting hung unspoken between them: fire and rescue, replaced by peace and partnership, crisis transformed to choice. Alexandra's quiet question broke the contemplative silence. Do you think Lucy would be open to the idea of a sibling someday? Not immediately, but perhaps in the future. The question carried implications beyond family planning, commitment to permanent partnership, creation of new bonds beyond those formed through crisis and recovery, deliberate choice to build life together rather than merely coordinate separate existences. Jack's response acknowledged both the question's significance and Lucy's centrality to any such decision. I think she'd be the world's most enthusiastic big sister. She's already been asking if we're getting married, and apparently 9-year-olds aren't as patient with relationship timelines as adults try to be. The conversation opened new possibilities. Neither making impulsive declarations, but both recognizing the direction their relationship had taken from rescue to recovery to deliberate choice, from obligation to partnership to family. 5 years later, Harbor Point Harbor reflected morning light like scattered diamonds, peaceful and eternal. Jack Hayes guided a small fishing boat through familiar waters, his experienced hands steady on the wheel while teaching 8-year-old William the basics of navigation. The boy's dark hair caught sunlight as he concentrated on maintaining course, his serious expression reminiscent of his mother's focused determination. On shore, 13-year-old Lucy adjusted her easel, capturing the harbor scene with practiced skill developed through years of dedicated artwork. Her heart surgery scar had faded to a thin white line, visible only when she chose swimming over, sailing, a childhood challenge transformed into matter-of-fact history rather than limiting identity. Alexandra Morgan Hayes approached the harbor overlook corporate phone, conspicuously absent as she carried coffee for herself and hot chocolate for Lucy. The restructuring that had begun as necessary compromise had evolved into innovative corporate model, with the Morgan Hayes Foundation now recognized for distributed leadership and community investment as much as technological innovation. Richard and Margaret Williams emerged from their nearby cottage, joining Alexandra to watch Jack and William's fishing lesson. Their relationship had transformed completely from the adversarial beginning. Grandparents who had once sought to remove Lucy from Jack's care now valued their expanded family role, including step-grandmother status with William. The fishing boat made its final approach to the dock, William beaming with pride at his successful navigation. The small craft bore the name Second Chance along its hull, a simple phrase encompassing complex truth about how lives could be rescued, rebuilt, and reimagined when people recognized what truly mattered. Harbor Point itself had evolved during these 5 years, still authentic fishing village, but with thoughtful additions, strengthening rather than diluting its character. The Harbor Point Maritime and Art Center, established through the Morgan Hayes Foundation, provided artistic education and marine skills training, balancing tradition with opportunity. As William proudly displayed their modest catch and Lucy packed her art supplies, the family prepared for their weekly community dinner at Murphy's Diner, a tradition that had begun during Lucy's recovery and continued as cornerstone of their Harbor Point life. The gathering would include Harbor Point residents who had supported them through medical crises and custody battles, friends whose practical assistance had evolved into chosen family. Jack and Alexandra exchanged glances over their children's excited chatter. Silent communication developed through years of partnership, conveying everything words couldn't adequately express. From burning yacht to blended family, from corporate crisis to coastal contentment, their journey had defied conventional narrative or rational expectation. What had begun as life-threatening emergency had transformed into life-affirming connection. The rescue that started on water had continued on land, saving them both from limitations. They hadn't recognized Jack from isolation and grief and financial struggle, Alexandra from achievement without meaning and wealth without purpose. The family walked together toward Murphy's Diner, their path illuminated by afternoon sunlight. Fishing boats returned to dock shop owners, prepared for evening customers, year-round residents, and summer visitors mingled along the waterfront promenade, developed through the Maritime Center project. Lucy looped her arm through Alexandra's while describing her latest art exhibition. William walked between Jack and his grandparents, detailing navigation techniques he'd mastered during their harbor excursion. The conversations overlapped and intertwined, creating the comfortable cacophony of family communication that required no translation or explanation. The modest blue house still stood on its harbor overlook, joined now by Alexandra's renovated cottage in the Williams seasonal home. 3 properties representing different worlds gradually merged into shared territory, not through compromise or conquest, but through recognition of complementary value and common purpose. Inside Murphy's Diner, the community that had witnessed their journey waited to welcome them. Walt Johnson with his maritime wisdom, Pete Peterson from the marina, Beth from the bed and breakfast where Alexandra had begun her search for her mysterious rescuer. These witnesses to their unlikely beginning now participated in their continuing story Harbor Point, having expanded its definition of family to include connections formed through crisis and sustained through choice. The rescue that began on water had rippled outward, touching lives beyond those directly involved and creating community strengthened by shared challenge rather than divided by difference. As they settled at their table overlooking the harbor where everything had begun, evening sunlight caught Alexandra's wedding ring, a simple band, rather than ostentatious diamond, its understated design reflecting their relationship's values. Jack's observation captured their journey's essence. When I pulled you from that yacht, I never imagined I was really rescuing myself. Alexander's response completed the thought with characteristic precision. The most valuable things can't be measured in dollars or listed on balance sheets. They're calculated in moments that change who you are and who you choose to become afterward. The conversation expanded to include Lucy's exhibition, William's sailing lessons, community projects, and family plans, ordinary topics that represented extraordinary transformation. What had begun with fire and fear had evolved into connection that defied conventional categories, rescuing each of them in ways none could have anticipated that foggy morning in Harbor Point Harbor.